If you're installing multiple membrane panels, you'll need to seam them. Here's the procedure for installing field seams using Genflex 3-inch seam tape. Lay out the membrane panels to allow a 4-inch overlap. This will create a proper seam area. Once the panels are laid out and have relaxed for 30 minutes, you are ready to start the seaming process. Mark the bottom panel 1/2 inch from the edge of the top panel. This will allow for 1/8 to 1/4 inch of exposed tape when the seam is completed. Stir the Gen Prime thoroughly. It should look uniform in color with no marbling or sediment at the bottom of the container. Tack back the membrane with Gen Prime by applying it every 3 to 6 feet along the seam. Fold back the top panel approximately 5 inches. Using your layout marks as a guide, apply Gen Prime to the seaming areas of both membrane panels. Always provide additional cleaning at factory seams to remove any excess dusting agent. Do not overwork the Gen Prime. A full scrub pad should cover no more than 5 to 6 linear feet of membrane. Allow the primer to flash off completely before installing the seam tape. Push the primer with your finger to determine if it has flashed off sufficiently. If it has flashed off, it will not come off onto your finger. To install the seam tape, position the edge of the release paper on your layout marks. Press the tape with your hand to adhere it to the bottom membrane panel. If you reach the end of a seam tape roll mid-seam, you'll need to overlap the start of the new roll. First, mark the tape for a 3-inch overlap. Then fold back the release paper to expose the seam tape. Align and apply seam tape from a new roll by overlapping the installed tape by 3 inches, and continue the seam tape application. Next, with the release paper still on the seam tape, hand roll the entire strip of seam tape for good contact between the membrane and seam tape. Now, mate the seam. First, untack the top membrane panel and allow it to fall freely over the seam area. Check the reveal to be sure there is 1/4 to 1/2 inch of tape exposed. Next, pull the release paper from the tape away from the seam while brushing your hand across the top membrane panel at a right angle to mate the seam. Hand roll the entire seam, first at a right angle toward the outer edge and then along the length of the splice. Special attention is needed at factory seams. At membrane overlaps, you'll need to create an end-lap seam. Here's how you do it. Mark the lower membrane panel for a 4-inch overlap. Install Genflex 3-inch seam tape as you did for the panel seams. Hand roll the end-lap with a seam roller for good contact. Complete the detail by caulking the seam edges at seam tape to seam tape splices and T-joints. First, clean the area using Genflex cleaner. Then, caulk the T-joints and tape splices a minimum of 3 inches in all directions.